Well, hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar organized by the European DBT Association. My name is Jan Hilbig. I'm a psychiatrist and psychotherapist, and I will be moderating this webinar. And our speaker is Dr. Julia Azevedo. She is a clinical psychologist. She's also a researcher based at the Mood Disorders Center at the University of Exeter, and her fields of interest and expertise are developing and adapting adaptations and creating interventions for individuals who have bipolar disorder, also for treatment-resistant depression. And as you have already seen, the topic of the webinar is dialectical behavior therapy for bipolar disorders. Julieta's talk will last around 60 minutes, and then we have about up to 30 minutes for your comments and questions. We want to have a discussion in those 30 minutes, and you're very, very welcome to join that. How you can join is by putting your questions and your comments into the chat box in the YouTube channel. You might, however, have to refresh the YouTube page from time to time, so you'll be able to see the renewed version of that. Well, so much maybe for the introduction. I'm very happy to hand over to you, Julieta, now for your talk.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm very glad to be here today presenting on this topic, which is something I really appreciate talking about. And as it has been mentioned, so I do currently work at the Mood Disorder Center in Exeter in the UK. And there I do a bit of delivery of DBT-informed therapy for people with bipolar disorder and other mood disorders. So that's something that I have been developing and been interested about. So moving on to, let me see if this is moving. Yeah, there we go. Today we're going to kind of go through, this is the menu for today, which is covering what is bipolar disorder, what are those challenges, the usual treatments that they get so far today, why DBT for bipolar disorder, the biosocial model for bipolar, research on DBT for bipolar, where are we at? And then I will essentially get into the my study that I applied, which is Be Real. It was a pilot using DBT for bipolar disorder, just DBT skills, and the adapted materials. And I'll focus on them. So I'll try not to spend much time in the skills that you already know, but essentially covering what are the differences of the ones you haven't heard of because they have been specifically developed. I will try to not be exhaustive in the part of like the research and what it's about, but considering that a lot of people that are delivering DBT are usually delivering to people with borderline personality disorder, I think it's important to just kind of have a bit of a starting ground around bipolar disorder. So this is a disorder that has a multi-component origin. Obviously, there's no clear just one factor origin. So what we see is that it is characterized by having episodes of severe mood disturbance. And in this graph here, you can see how essentially the different types of bipolar will vary between having depressive and hypomania episodes for type 2. And for type 1, the person can go up to mania and depression episodes and have several in between of just hypomania. So you can have all those presentations. In green, you can see how the average person, reacts to life events. And it gives an example of like losing a job or having a significant stressful event. It dips a bit, but it goes back to the average. So what we would consider euthymic state. And for a bipolar person, when this happens, usually they will dip more. And if it is a positive event, they will also go up more. So have that vulnerability. So that's the main differences, I would say. And whilst in borderline, we see a lot of changes, sometimes even in the same day. With bipolar, I would say it usually goes on for more days. So if they are depressed, that tends to stay for a couple of days, up to 2 weeks, sometimes months. And when they are going on a high and in an hypomanic state, at least 4 days, it's the same, like the criteria, and then it can stay for longer. So I think that's the main characteristics to keep in mind. What other things that are typical in bipolar disorder is like immunological changes. They tend to have a lot of comorbidities also with medical issues, lower quality of life in general, physiological changes and disturbances in functioning. And this affects everything, like cognitively and the ability to work and sustain a job. Bipolar disorder is one of the leading causes of disability worldwide and is associated with high rates of premature mortality from both suicide and medical comorbidities. And bipolar disorder, it also has much higher mortality rates than borderline personality disorder, because much more of them do die by suicides when attempted. So I think that's relevant to know. The usual treatment for people with bipolar disorder, in the first line of treatment is still pharmacotherapy. So they'll usually be treated with simultaneously mood stabilizers, antipsychotics, and antidepressants in case of type 1. In type 2, usually they do not need the antipsychotics because they don't have the psychotic symptoms. So they will just use the other two. However, in terms of psychological treatments, what has been used more, it has been psychoeducation has been more studied, CBT for bipolar disorder, interpersonal social therapy, and family-focused therapy. The problem with all these studies is that, as you can see here in the summary, and you have different systematic reviews here, Demice, Bayan, Cardozo, they all show that the quality of these studies is quite low, is not consistent, and they're not replicated. So there is still no gold standard in terms of the treatment for bipolar disorder, not in medical terms and not in psychological ones. So recently, so why, starting to introduce how bipolar disorder kind of connects with DBT, I've recently co-wrote this paper called A Perspective from the European Network for Bipolar and Emotion Regulation with people from all over Europe and that are part of DBT European Association as well. And it is free and available, so you can, if you scan the QR code, you'll get the article for free. And here we do a bit of a summary of the different applications of DBT for bipolar, not only DBT, we talk about other interventions for emotion regulation as well, but we talk about what we learn, not only from research, but also from our clinical practice. I think a practical example that I can give you is how mindfulness sometimes needs to be adapted in terms of the length, so that you keep people on doing an exercise, and also the type of instructions you give. Because if people are going high, you might have in the same group, if you are doing this exercise in the group, you might have people going high and people feeling low. And so it's quite challenging for people feeling high. They say that instructions that's like the rock in the lake or things that are very calming and where you are expecting for things to settle down can be quite challenging. So more than that, they identify more, for instance, with the mountain, where no matter what the weather is, you can stand still and see the things go by. And that seems to accommodate better both experiences. So this is one of the examples that we talk about, and another things, small adjustments that we realized we needed to do when we were working with bipolar. So I think this is a good paper if you want to look into it. But essentially, the things that we do talk that DBT seems to be helpful for people with bipolar are obviously the emotion regulation strategies. So they seem to work just as well in terms of noticing an emotion and then being able to use opposite action to regulate or step away from it using stop. And these kinds of skills seem to be very useful. And mainly when the person understands they're going into mood states that does affect their ability to think in advance and to even stop their impulses in terms of, if we think about hypomania. So it's quite useful there. It can be quite useful in early sign detection. So this, when we talk about early signs, we talk about noticing that my mood is starting to dip. How do I notice this? And listing those. And if it's starting to go up, what do I notice? And what can I be aware of? And we can use this with mindfulness and emotion naming. They're quite useful for people with bipolar. Give me just, you might have noticed that this is walking on its own. Oh, no, that's not what I wanted. My apologies. But I was trying to get this to stop moving on its own, but I might not be successful. So just tell me in advance. Okay. So this might move sometimes. So I'm letting you all know. It's also very useful, obviously, DBT in terms of the interpersonal effectiveness, because due to the episodes of hypomania and mania mainly, people with bipolar tend to have interpersonal difficulties, sometimes after the episode, sometimes during, where it has, they say things they don't mean, or they are too impulsive, or harm other people somehow, sometimes with words, sometimes being a bit more rough. And then the dear man give fast skills, for instance, can be quite useful to use in either to apologize or to ask for what they need in order to be helped beforehand. I covered, I think, most of this, but another some two that I would say here is also the recognizing mood shifts. So it's still like detecting the early signs. It connects with that, but we can use the cope ahead, like, and prepare for that in advance. And obviously trying to reduce the number of episodes, because if we help people with bipolar stop them right at the start, it's less likely that it will develop into a full either depressive episodes or mania episodes. So these are the main kind of obvious things that the DBT can help with. And the other obvious things is noticing that the presentations and the targets can be the same. So what I've noticed working with people with bipolar is that the suicide ideation is quite around, mainly in depressive episodes, but also in mixed episodes, it shows up a lot. So this is when those symptoms from depression and high energy are present. And this is also what makes them more deadly for people with bipolar, is that if you have the energy and the desperation, this is a very concerning combo in terms of the outcomes. So, but the common target is to bring this down, so to bring the suicide ideation behaviors. And this DBT is designed for this. So this will seem quite, I think, straightforward to you. The other part is the possibility of comorbidities. So the 10 to 20% of people with bipolar will also have BPD. And the DBT's biosocial roots. I'll talk about the biosocial model specifically and how is it different for people with bipolar. But the truth is they have the emotional vulnerabilities. So that's there, the biological factors and the environmental factors are usually quite present as well, because there's a strong component of having people with bipolar have people with bipolar as parents. So as close family, it can be uncles, it can be grandparents, and this tends to increase the possibility of having mood disorders in the family, which naturally contributes to having sometimes negligent treatment or not having such an efficacious just parenting and mood modeling, mood regulation modeling. Okay, so if we look at the biosocial model and how we would usually explain it to people with borderline personality disorder, this is the usual and the last one. So this was the one that was adapted to say that all of these, the biological vulnerabilities, together with high-risk transactions between child contribution and the caregiver contribution, so child characteristics and the caregiver, they might feed each other into dysregulation. All this together contributes to inherited impulse control deficits that are met with environmental reinforcement of the bad behaviors or of the behaviors that are more manifest and more extreme. And all of that then contributes to pervasive emotional dysregulation. Like looking at this quite simply, because you should be quite familiar with this model. So how is this different for bipolar disorder? They do have, I would say, like a wider variety of problems associated with the comorbidity. They are known for polymorbidity, which means 3 or 4 other conditions sometimes apart from bipolar, and this can be both mental health or um, medical conditions. And inside this, like lots of factors have been found. The genetic loading is quite strong, as I was saying, about 50%. There's about 50% changes of passing on bipolar disorder to descendants, and there tends to be a higher, even higher level of mood disorders in the family. So this contributes a lot to emotion dysregulation from a really from a biological level. So there seems to be like a change in the dopamine system, for instance, that they cannot capture it as well, and the excitability, which makes the person, when they start going up, it's very hard to go down because it will stay in that system, in that loop. Obviously, there's environmental factors that contribute to this, and all of those contribute to neuronal changes that then produce systemic consequences, like inflammatory effects, metabolic syndrome, and the ones that we know better are and can influence are actually the behavioral correlates. And this is where we can look at changes in mood symptoms, changes in energy levels, and disturbed thinking and behavior. So all of those will have obviously a functional outcome of cognitive impairment, difficulty making decisions, and poor psychosocial adjustment. So what I did for my PhD was about adapting DBT for bipolar and assessing them properly. So I integrated both this model and the one that I'll show you next into the biosocial model. So this is going to look like a lot, and I will go through it easily, but please contact me or make questions if you would like to know anything more specific, because I don't want to just lose too much time on these models. But there's this other model that I find is quite self-explanatory, but it talks about 2 different profiles that can be found in people with bipolar disorder in terms of the emotion regulation. This is still an hypothetical model that is being studied, so this has not been consistently proven. It is now under investigation. But I think it's quite interesting because it shows that there seems to be 2 profiles of people, some that use more approach-oriented emotion regulation patterns, and this would be people that jump into anything, and if it's positive, they will think it's amazing, and they get into this cycle that then will respond in an escalating response, and the mood might tend to go up more, and they enter in the emotion dysregulation cycle more connected with highs, or go into that mode. The people who have a bigger tendency for avoidance patterns, they will enter this other cycle of rumination, dampening, and use withdrawal more, and those will tend to depress more. So these seem to be more associated with cycles of depression and with more pervasive depression patterns, but they can alternate. So a person might have one pattern and still alternate between mood symptoms. So this is very simply put, okay? But what I did was including the things we know from both these models into Marsha's original model. What I'll tell you now that I think is relevant and is different is essentially that the biological vulnerabilities are different, but they still contribute to having less control over one's emotions, having inherited impulse control difficulties and vulnerabilities that will contribute, together with environmental factors, to heighten emotion dysregulation. And those then, these ones are the same. The ones you can see here in orange, kind of, or a light beige, those are the same. The main difference is that this process repeated over time will conduce to mood symptoms that are not regulated, and the reactions to other people to it is like, so why would you be so sad for something so simple? It's still an invalidating environment that does not understand why the person reacts with such intensity, and that conduces to more mood episodes, and that then has an increased risk for negative outcomes in the different areas in social, cognitive, emotional, and behavioral areas of the person's life. And all of these will contribute to pervasive emotion dysregulation. Yeah. So, and the other additional thing, if you can see here a lightning effect. So significant and adverse life events seem to have a bigger impact in people with bipolar. So a lot of people with bipolar, for instance, after either being fired or having a fight with a friend or changing homes, this might conduce to mania episodes because it's a big shift, and so there's a boost, and they have more tendency to get into mood episodes if a significant life event happens. So I think this is a particularity of this model that wouldn't be present in borderline personality disorder, even though stressful events have a role there. Okay, so if we were presenting this to a person with bipolar disorder, we would try to personalize to their life story, like we do with borderline personality disorder, and explaining to them how the neuronal changes and the systemic consequences of their disorder is not their fault. And this is the part that we bring back to them. Okay. So now I'll talk a little bit about how much research has actually been done in terms of DBT for bipolar disorder. So Jones et al. In 2023 released a systematic review that identified around 15 studies that use DBT for bipolar. From these studies, only Goldstein has, Tina Goldstein is the one who first she did the first open trial for adolescents using the full program of DBT. If I'm not mistaken, all the other studies have only used DBT skills. Okay, so they didn't use the full program. So the full program has not been used with adults, as far as I am aware. So all these studies, what they do, the problem with all these studies is that they have mainly been just pilot studies, so they do not have power, like they are not powered to take causal conclusions. So we can say that it seems to favor DBT over treatment as usual, in the sense that people usually, people in the treatment arm are getting better results in terms of emotion regulation. They are getting better results in terms of suicidality, behaviors and ideation going down, higher mindfulness, higher self-compassion. The mood changes have not been high, but recurrence of mood episodes in some studies have decreased. In this second batch of studies, I have identified the first two, Ashfari and Zargar. I would say that these studies do not have quality to say that they have been DBT studies. So when I looked inside the studies and how they were developed, they were not well described enough, and sometimes used very few DBT skills. So I used a lot of other studies too, and were not clearly defined. So I wouldn't wouldn't trust these two studies because they do not achieve like a high quality when I assess them. There's only, from all these studies that I mentioned, then 15 studies that have been made, there was only one that was released last year that actually did a full-scale randomized controlled trial. That was Goldstein et al. For adolescents, and it has shown a significant decrease in suicide attempts. Emotion dysregulation was mediated the effects of treatment, so it seemed to work very well as a mediator, and mood symptoms were not different between treatment as usual in the treatment arm. So this will come to show, like as I will tell you next, that there's still a lot to be done in terms of efficacy proven in people with bipolar disorder, even though the feedback from people and the qualitative research says people really like DBT and seem to be feasible and acceptable. This is the visual results of these studies that I was telling you. So this is the only study with DBT for adolescents with bipolar disorder that has enough power to say that DBT was actually better than treatment as usual. And here treatment as usual was standard of care psychotherapy for bipolar disorder. So people in the control group would receive 1 year of individual and family therapy with clinicians trained in evidence-based treatments for use with bipolar disorder. So this was a specific treatment for bipolar, and DBT was better than the original treatment. So I think it's quite encouraging to see that these improvements happen. What they did differently from standard DBT was the family skills sessions. So they had group, just like the family connections, they used groups with family and the adolescents with bipolar disorder, but they started with psychoeducation about bipolar disorder, about mood episodes, differences between moods and emotions. And yeah, essentially they then adapted the examples, and in the problem behaviors, they included the problem behaviors more associated with bipolar. So this is roughly the main differences. Okay, so what are these necessary adaptations? What are these studies telling us that is necessary to do? So even though preliminary research does suggest that DBT is feasible, we would say that it is necessary to adapt DBT for the individual phase of the illness. So as you might imagine, if the person is going high or is going low, you will need different skills and to bring different skills in. And you will work more towards doing more active things and excitable in moments where the person is going low and the other way around. So those adjustments need to be made, and there needs to be a different view in terms of recovery, because this is a recurrent disorder, and mania and depressive episodes might kick in even if they're doing everything right, and this needs to be acknowledged in terms of the recovery process. In terms of the pre-treatment, it's quite important to identify what are obviously the problem behaviors, and here take into account what are the triggers for that person in terms of mania and depression or hypomania. Be mindful of the energy states. So skills like opposite action may need careful use during manic or mixed states. The mixed states are the most challenging, because if the person is having both, it's quite difficult to know where to go, but it will really have to be tailored to what the person presents and are the unintended consequences. So we'll try to and focus on the goal and the best way to get to that goal, but it is more challenging, I would say, to bring the problematic emotion down or regulate it. Obviously, there's still further research needed, because as I told you, like most of the studies have just used some skills and have not consistently used the adapted instruments for bipolar. So we need to have a clear review on these different combinations and what seems to make the difference. Obviously, the challenges and limitations is that this is not happening yet. So there's obviously lack of long-term follow-ups. Hopefully, like Goldstein has now published this year and has follow-ups accounted for. Skills dilution in brief versions. So there's like some programs with 10 sessions and even smaller than that, and just use some of the skills. Small samples, heterogeneity, and heterogeneity of skills used also within those studies. So obviously these are the challenges, and all the things that I'll tell you now that seem to happen to help are based on my pilot and my experience, more the clinical experience, and I will be working towards building research to support that as well. So do bear that in mind. Now, what I'm going to show you is the program that I did, which was called Be Real. It's Be Real stands for Respond Effectively and Live Mindfully. And this consisted of a 12 sessions group intervention. It was delivered online, and it was a pilot RCT. So it had like a control arm and a treatment arm that received Be Real. So this is published. So once again, this is free and in open. It is open source. So if you search this online, you'll have access to the full study, which is why I'm not going to get into details in terms of the methodology, because you see it all, you can see it all there. So I'll try and focus in the bits you cannot find in the article. So we had people with bipolar disorder in this as inclusion criteria. It was having a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. Sorry, this is going on its own. And essentially, they had to be euthymic at the start of treatment, and then we used as our main outcome measures bipolar recovery questionnaire and the quality of life questionnaire, and we used also the DERS, the difficulties in regulating emotions. We had so in the experimental group, we had 73% of people with bipolar 1 and 26% with bipolar 2. And the control group was more 50-50. It was a random block randomization, but this is what we got at the end. So let's look into the program itself and how it was structured. So we did a pre-session with everyone. So because we didn't have the individual therapy, we only had the group sessions. People could ask for support between sessions. So if they needed help with applying the skills, they could use up to 5 sessions of individual support. But the main idea was for coaching. So it was coaching, skills coaching. So in this pre-session, we would see with everyone what were their main goals and what they intended to achieve. And then we would move on to the mindfulness module, where we would teach what skills and the how skills, and then move into emotion regulation. That was the one with more sessions. So we had 6 sessions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sessions of emotion regulation. And most of the skills are not altered. What we would alter would be the examples, right? So the main changes were using the biosocial model adapted to bipolar. And then on the third session, with the beginning of the emotion regulation, we do a clarification between mood and emotions. So that's the difference, on top of understanding, identifying, and labeling emotions, that you will use the typical DBT skills, right? And then the other different skill is cameras, and I will explain what that consists of. The others are the same, right? So this is an example of how we would look at, first we will try to do this interactively with people to ask what do they think is the difference between emotion and moods. And we start with duration. So obviously moods have a longer duration, have a more gradual onset and continuous kind of development. And then often in lower intensity, and then the duration and of an emotion is shorter, more intense, and has a more rapid onset. So we will explain these differences between also what provokes one and the other. So there are lower, like in terms of mood, there's a lower threshold needed to trigger emotions, and then they are also harder to regulate. So in terms of the modulation, you can see that mood makes regulation mostly unaffected on one side, but then the emotions are more difficult to regulate if experienced within mood. So they contribute to each other. So this is something that we would introduce and present and see if there's any any questions around differences between emotion and mood. And then we would move on to the material cameras, which is tailored to people with bipolar. So I did some changes to the original materials, but if you look up the article from Rocco et al. From 2020, it's called Enhancing DBT for Bipolar Disorder. They were the first ones to develop these materials, and they were done jointly with people who are used to working with people with bipolar disorder and people with bipolar disorder. So this was like how it was developed. So how do they work? We'll have cameras for both depression and mania. And the idea is to go through these letters and to essentially help stop one of these moods or like mood episodes from settling in. So when we see that depression might start to be present, we would go through this, check the mood, how is it, how intense is it, and then analyze that based on like pros and cons of what we're thinking about doing. So I'll give you some examples of this. And then maximize stimulation in terms of depression. Obviously, mania will be minimizing stimulation. Evaluate confidence levels. This works for both. Obviously, in depression, you'll expect way lower confidence levels. The person thinks there's no point, there's nothing I can do, I'm not able to. In terms of mania, you'll have the opposite. The person feels like they can do anything, so they might do reckless things because of that. In terms of relaxation, I'll also show you the differences between being on a high or going high or going low. Asking for help and feedback, and that works for both. And the S is for sleep and sleep monitoring. And here we will connect the sleep that is inside, please, as you know, but try to connect that to balance the please, but definitely monitor the sleep, which we know it's a strong and vulnerable thing for people with bipolar, makes them way more vulnerable even to mood symptoms than people with borderline. So this is an example of the emotional regulation worksheets. They are available in that article I mentioned of the Rocco et al. And this is an example that I did together with the people with bipolar disorder, and we worked on it to fill it in how we would do in a group session. So here we have an example of vulnerability factors and the situation. So I haven't slept well is the example. I haven't slept well in the last 2 days, and I had an argument last night with my friends, and I haven't been very busy. So this was vulnerability factors that then contributed to the person feeling very sad. So they characterize their mood as being sad with an intensity of about 70, right? So then describing the emotion, using our mindfulness skills, as we know, try and describe this emotion as best that the person can. And here is an example like the emotion started in the morning when I woke up with a headache and I thought I wouldn't be able to do everything I had to do or help my friends. And I don't think I'm a good friend. And that instead of helping, I only upset him more. Sorry, because this was translated from the Portuguese, so it might be a bit confusing. But I think I can fulfill my obligation and I fail. So this is how the person felt they couldn't reach out to their friends. And yeah, and they just start ruminating on this. So they start thinking that they will just stay at home and call to say they're not going to be able to go and work. And we analyze the pros and cons of the different goals that a person has. Going ahead with my goal and not going ahead, what is going to help? What is going to happen? And here, because the person is thinking about not going to work, we could put as a pro would be by choosing the first one, skipping work means that during that time I can rest and I don't feel so bad and stressed out. But by not doing this, I don't miss work and I won't be taken out of my pay, nor can it then be used as a reason not to renew my contract, which is a concern that the person has. Okay, so this is kind of some examples on how this can be worked out. Evaluate the confidence levels. This is when the person feels like, how confident do you think you'll be able to do this and take this ahead? And then how can you ask for help and who can you ask for help? These are kind of things you will do in advance. And if you think about this is a bit of coping ahead. It's just focused towards mood dysregulation and mood episodes. Another example here that this was filled in together with people of the groups that I run in this treatment with bipolar disorder. So people said what helped them relax when they are going into hypo or maniac states and what helps them when they are going into depression. So if you can see here, there's different things and there are some that can work for both. Usually what changes is the intensity and the speed. So if you think in opposite action, if we want the person to get excited, we want them to listen to music, but music that is active, right? So that's what we'll encourage them to do, relating to others, do physical intense exercise. If the person is going high, we don't want that. or if they do that, we want it slow. So we'll have slower music, listening to relaxation music, pause breathing, swimming slowly or floating. So these are like some of the examples that you can use in one or the other. And you can also use skills like the stress tolerance skills to apply here, like the stop, the tip can be used if the person is going high, and accepts and distraction can be used if the person is feeling quite low and ruminating. Yeah. Um, Also, the thing, so we did a big list of ways to decrease stimulation and ways to increase stimulation. So if the person is going low, we might tell them to put some music on, open your windows so it's not too dark. Make sure you go out to a place where there's more people, even if you're on your own. Um, and we want them to have more noise, more things happening, more movement, because this will make them want to move too. Drink coffee, something that excitable, and it can give them extra energy. If they are going high, we want the opposite. We want one thing at a time. We want to decrease the number of stimuli. We want to decrease the lightning, and yeah, just calmer stimulus in general. So don't go to busy places. Don't be around a lot of people. If you want to meet a friend, do meet just one at a time. This is the kind of different adjustments that we will encourage people to do. So I touched already in both. So as you can see, the things that change the most are essentially the maximize and minimize stimulation, and the relaxation are different. So we want slower things for people going high and faster things and more intense for people going low. Uh, the asking for help and feedback. The strategy can be a bit different too, but essentially you'll have a list of people and you can have a different list with them of people that help them when they're high and people that help them when they're low. And also have like a quick list of the doctor if they need to change their medication, and make sure you can cover those bases if there's a needed um, additional support is needed. In terms of sleep, so there is a sleep schedule that you'll find on that handout, and it is essentially for the person to write down how many hours did they slept, and how long has it been happening during the week. You can include the sleep schedule in the mood diary. So this is something that I did for this program. We included that. So every week they will assess how their sleep was in the last week, how many hours they slept on average. And if they are really struggling, then you can introduce a sleep hygiene protocol that is available in the Marsha's Linehan skills manual. So obviously then, you will find this description in the article that I mentioned, how to reduce vulnerability to manic mood episodes and how to reduce vulnerability to depressive mood episodes, and how all of this works. And I show you now in practice how you would do this. The vulnerabilities and triggers to keep in mind when you're doing the please, you should also touch on these. So you can say, okay, so we'll check, sleep, like substances, definitely how you've been feeding yourself, and any of these ones. Definitely check on medication alteration or missing medication can be quite a trigger here. So we want to check for that. Pregnancy or hormonal changes can have a big toll in mood symptoms for people with bipolar disorder. And seasonal changes and weather are a very specific one for these people too. So changes in the lights and how many hours of light you have in a day, and being cloudy can really change the moods and deepen it, like dip it or take it high. But you really need to obviously understand what the pattern of that person is and if they feel affected by seasonal changes or not. But I would say these are the main ones you want to make sure you cover. So in terms of which other modules we used, as you can see here, I used then like 2 sessions on distress tolerance using stop, tip skills, accept, self-soothe, willing hands, half smile, and radical acceptance. We did an interesting work around radical acceptance of having bipolar disorder, which people really valued. And then Dear Man and Give Fast and validation was the skills that we did brought into this program. In terms of the results, there was a very positive general acceptability. People seemed very satisfied, a range with an average of 9.48 in terms of their satisfaction in a 0 to 10 scale, and they would definitely recommend it. And they felt improvements in dealing with their mood symptoms. So they did felt they were better skilled to deal with mood changes. We assessed like every session in terms of these 4 main topics: relationships, goals and topics, approach or method, and overall. And we had really good scores in terms of feeling understood and respected in the relationship with the people delivering the program, goals and topics, and what the approach used, and overall it was well received. And what I would like to show you as well is that their mood variance really decreased. So they would have to write in their mood diaries how their mood had been across the week. So from -5 would be the most depressed I've ever been, and 5 would be severely hypomanic and the highest I've ever been. And what we noticed across the 12 weeks of the program was that they rated less and less high these variations across time. And this was significant. And overall, it was significant, and the 2 emotions that there was a bigger change was in anger and sadness. The intensity of these emotions also decreased across time, and we saw a higher use of emotion, of skills use. So, but in the beginning, we saw a lot of 4s and 5s. So trieds could use them, but they didn't help, or could use them and they helped. And then it moved on to 5, and more having tried, could use them and helped, didn't try, use them, didn't help. So yeah, we would have a bit more of that. We found differences between control group and experimental group with large effect sizes in terms of bipolar recovery. So there has been like a big increase in bipolar recovery, and quite different. So you can see in red, that's the experimental group, and in blue, you'll have the control group. And so we assessed them post-treatment, and 3 months after the treatment ended. And the differences were still significant after 3 months between people with bipolar and people that received BeReal and people who didn't. And in terms of quality of life, there was also improvements across time, and they were sustained still at 3 months post-treatment, even though they were closer to the control group. Another positive results and improvements that we could find when comparing the 2 groups was improvements in difficulties in regulating emotions in the experimental group, whilst in the control group there was no changes in the difficulties in regulating emotions. And at 3 months follow-up, there was a significant difference between the goal-directed behaviors, and that was not present immediately after the treatment, which was quite interesting, showing that those mood changes and those improvements in skills seem to help people, even 3 months later, to be better at pursuing their goals. There was also an increase in mindfulness awareness for the experimental group, and depressive symptoms were stable in the experimental group, whilst the control group worsened their symptoms at 3 months follow-up. So the main results of and summary of the results of this study particularly was that there was a significant change in mood variance across the 12 weeks, with changes in anger and sadness intensity, and the skills that they valued the most and mentioned the most in the interviews post-treatment was wise mind, opposite action, and radical acceptance. So participants found those particularly useful. And the program was acceptable and feasible. We were able to retain most people attended most sessions, like most people attended 80% of the sessions. We had, very positive feedback from people, and most participants would have liked. Yeah. Am I 10 minutes? Yeah. Yes. Great. I am at the like close. I did went faster than I thought, so that's good. I think it will give a bit more time for questions, and I can deepen the knowledge of people in an area if they find it interesting. So I was just adding here that participants continued to get together after this. So there's now like peer-driven Be Real, like skills program with people that went through this trial, which makes me very proud. And some of the improvement suggestions from the participants were having better clarification of the homework. They found it sometimes a bit heavy, like, and the sheets that we use, the original ones from Marsha most of the time, and they thought it was a bit much, so they would like simplified materials and the possibility to add more sessions. So most people did say they would really like more sessions. So what would I like you to take home today about how to use DBT for bipolar disorder and what seems to work best? So DBT can be adapted to support individuals with bipolar disorder, and modifications might enhance its efficacy, or at least that's what it is being suggested. The decision to use DBT full program, I didn't touch it this much. I intended to, so I'm glad I have this here. So why do you, like, looking at all those studies that I presented at the beginning, only one in the adolescents group was actually full program. And the truth is, all the ones that deliver DBT skills only with some support, people were not self-harming. So this is important to say. Most, I looked through the studies, and in mine including, there was no active self-harm. And this is why, when that's happening, then you can move on to just DBT skills. So that decision of using DBT skills or the full program should be based on the presentation and the severity of the presentation in terms of suicidality. If there's ideation, but there's no self-harm or active attempts, or there hasn't been, for us we use in the last 6 months, that hadn't been suicide attempt, then you can work on the skills without the full program. If there is active, then we would encourage full program, even though this hasn't been tested in adults yet. Main adaptations to have in mind. It is important to do psychoeducation regarding bipolar disorder, or at least make sure that the person already received psychoeducation in bipolar disorder and understand what that was, because it is quite different. People will have different contacts with mental health services and with other charities even that do this work. So make sure you understand what they know about bipolar disorder, understanding and explaining the difference between mood symptoms and what moods are, what mood is, and what emotions are, and how do they differ, how do they influence each other, and also what warning signs is. So that work, I think, is done around coping ahead, and you can wave that in, the warning signs, in the cope ahead and in the please skills, making sure you cover what seems to be triggers for their well-being. Emphasis on mood regulation alongside emotion regulation. So, and understanding that, for instance, just using opposite action alone when the person is already in a depressive episode is not going to work out. So that's why we can improve the moment. We can add more things, more stimuli, more people in order to help them get out of that mood episode. And giving the unique challenge of bipolar, like mood shifts, we need to kind of understand this pattern. The cameras handouts are essential as well, and I showed you they are possible to download, and do feel free to reach out if you haven't found them. I'm happy to send it across. And so far, DBT has been proven to be efficacious for adolescents, not for bipolar, but the preliminary evidence is quite encouraging. And that is it. Any questions now?
Wow, Julieta, I'm really impressed. It really was very easy to feel how deeply you are in this matter, both from a theoretic point of view, but also in a very practical, clinical sense.
Yeah.
You've given us some good insight into those deep models that you helped to develop, and also some tools, and your results are very encouraging, I think, as well.
Yeah, yeah.
We also have one comment about that on YouTube. There's someone just thanking you for the very useful and impressing presentation. I haven't seen questions there yet, but I do have some questions myself. So if you don't mind, I will just start with them, and then you can also remind me that we should have a glance at the YouTube from time to time to check if there's something coming up.
Yeah.
The first thing I wanted to ask you, I really thought it was cool how you unfolded these different interventions for different mood states, what depressive people should do and what people in a manic state should do. So what I was wondering about, I mean, in the actual group session, how much would you be doing activity planning with these people? Like planning specific, like schedule-oriented activities?
So what we did more was, so the way I ran the program, for instance, in mine, it was just like a typical DBT skills. So we'll do homework review at the start, right? And then like we do the second part with a new tool. So what we do is on that, and depending on what we're working on, in the skills teaching, we'll have moments for them to go into smaller groups, work together. If we're like delivering the part around moods, then they would think about an example where they had trouble with it, like, and what they would do. So what we'll try and do when we're delivering those is like, in the last week, was there any moment where you find that challenging, and like how can we address it, and what we would bring in to then help regulate that. So that could be activity planning in that sense.
Okay.
But then in the homework, that's where we try to personalize it more. So the homework would always be to go home and try to apply that in their week, or how they can kind of adjust, try to apply the skills on their everyday and test it out. If anything comes up that if it wasn't related with the skills we do of that week, we would still try to bring it up and see how people think that could help. So I think there's a lot of that advantages in the group to actually bring other examples that are not planned and help that person do problem solving. So I would do a bit of that when people brought it in like any random session.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. And then I'm curious about the small groups that you mentioned. Would
Yeah.
you actually mix them? I mean, people with different mood states, or would you do a selection based on that?
Well, what happened, like it is challenging. So I can share that what was most challenging in the group sessions was when we had people with going hypomanic, as you might imagine.
Right.
And so when that's happening, it's hard to stop them. People start getting nervous because someone is going off, and then they see that's happening. So I had some feedback of people finding that difficult. And what I did was actually working in session, saying, "Oh, I can see, you are feeling a lot of needs to talk. Can we address that? Can we kind of try and actually do an exercise with that?" So we had to do some sessions of addressing that in group and all trying to bring it down and do a mindfulness exercise. Sometimes the co-leader would have to take the person out, just like we would do sometimes with people with borderline if they are going off or saying things they're not supposed to, or talking about self-harm. So there are things in place that are agreed at the beginning, and so sometimes the co-lead will have to go out if the person is being too disruptive. If they're not, we will try to mix it. If people can manage, then we would do small groups. To use an example, for instance, when we were practicing the Dear Man, all of them had to use either a personal example or a list of examples that I would give them. And then together they would have to think how they would say it and make a plan on how they would do that script. So they would work together and then come back and share. And then I would help if they struggled somehow, or everyone else could pitch in. So that's how we kind of
Okay,
manage.
so something maybe to prepare for, to think about how to integrate those people, right? And how to
Yeah.
reduce maybe the
And
impact.
yeah, and that's the thing. Like we need to kind of test the waters before going on to those small groups. It is important to maybe first try and do it all together to see if
Right.
there's anyone that's kind of going off.
hmm
And if that happened, I would take them with me and kind of say, okay, can you you'll do it with me and someone else, and then kind of regroup and to
Yes.
try and manage. Because usually there was not more than one person going off.
hmm Okay, let me just have a look at the YouTube chat if there's anything new. Um, yes, there's several ones. Let me start from the top. Someone would like more guidance on how to find the handouts. Maybe you could just say which article it is
Yeah.
to jot down for people.
So it is the Rocco. If you give me a moment, I should be able, because I have looked it up so much. It's in my, yeah, it is on my quick list. So I will, oh, how can I can share the link now. So, but I'll say the title. It's Enhancing Dialectical Behavioral Therapy for the Treatment of Bipolar Disorder from D. Rocco, Liu, and Burretz to 2020. So it is available online and it is attached to the questionnaire. But if you don't find it, please, I can share my email again. If you ask me directly, I will share it. So I have it available, and I do have all the handouts. So if anyone didn't got my email, feel free to email me directly.
Great. Okay, that's good. Next question. There's some more. Martin wants to know about your RCT, whether you controlled for medication use.
So what we did was we controlled for medication changes. It didn't seem to influence. We did register all the medication they were having at the beginning, and we would ask if anything had changed during those 12 weeks. So if there was any medication change, it would be registered first in their diary card, and then we had the note of that and the interview as well. And at 3 months, we interviewed them again and asked. But that's how, like, there was not a standardization at the beginning because that's really it's not acceptable here because we had psychiatrists in our team, but what we were able to get was the people that they had. They would give us a very detailed treatment, and they were about in the same treatment, but we would have other people that we didn't have access to their psychiatry. But we did have the prescription.
Okay. One more by Martin.
Mhm.
His question is if you have ever thought about combining skills with mobility sensors. He cites it as a very effective tool to identify early warning signals.
Well, I haven't, but I would love to. Like, it is something that is definitely growing. Any kind of those measures. So now with like the smartwatches and the wearables as well is quite an interesting thing that people use, and it has integrated apps that can monitor the change in heartbeat and like other kind of activities. So I would definitely like to look into that, and that's something that I will be looking into in the future big scale RCT, like to use some wearables and other controls.
And even for an individual session, I mean, I remember asking a patient with bipolar disorders just about the steps that they have on their smartphone.
Mhm.
And it's really impressive sometimes how you can see how
Activity.
it changes according to the
Yes.
mood swing.
Actually, there is like a company right now. They have created a very interesting and very successful early signs app for people with psychosis,
Okay.
and they are now. And I have talked with them, and they are thinking about developing it for bipolar, and
Wow.
that would be amazing because what it does is that like the levels of activity, how much they have moved, it will detect that, and it can actually prompt the person to say you have been moving a lot. The last time we saw this, like for instance, it was you were going on to a low period. You want to talk with someone, so it will kind of prompt them and try to help them and ask more often where they would put their moods. So this is something I'm quite curious to see if it's developed and then could be used in a study.
Yes. Okay. We can continue. We have some more. This is Julie asking about the online format. She says, were there any challenges of doing the program online? Were people attending even in the highest or lowest points of mood?
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I was forced to change my program. So initially, I was one of the many researchers caught in the middle of a study with the pandemic. So it was being delivered in 2019 at the peak. So I had to change my program to be completely online because
Mm,
at the time I was recruiting people in hospitals and in sites, and I had to go online. So because of that, then that was the only option. But the truth is, I think I was benefited by it because people were like in their homes with nothing else to do. So they definitely wanted to go. They even came in bank holidays. They said, no, no, let's do the program anyway. So I think I was blessed by COVID in this sense. But they did said they felt it was quite useful, and I did call people out when they if they told me they were not going to come. I would use the DBT skills coaching, call them, try to convince them to come to session in the 10 minutes before session, because I would send messages to remind them. And if someone told me they were not coming because they were not feeling well, I would coach them into coming to sessions. So that made a big
wow. Mm,
difference. And it is very important. And me and my colleague were watching out for that, my co therapist, just before the group started. So I think that's essential. And a lot of
mhm,
the times they picked up and they came. When they were not able, I would do a follow-up call. So what happened? How could we manage it the next time?
mhm.
What can we help? So that's essential. If there's any sign or if they don't answer at all, I would be a dog with the bone. So I think that's very important.
Quite a bit
Uh,
of effort on your side, yes.
yeah, yes. And I
Mhm,
know not everyone will have that possibility, but I think some extra hours should be accounted for these programs to do that
mhm,
because we account for some hours in case they reach out. But if they don't, which is most often than not, they don't, we
mhm.
can use those hours to ourselves to chase that and to make it happen. But I think it was quite positive to be online. They said they would have liked in person because obviously then people got close and they did a dinner all together. I know people from different parts of the country, so that was interesting. But in terms of coming to the session, I think it was helpful, and people were joining with their phones, so it actually gave them more hypotheses than if it was just in person, I
Mhm.
think.
Okay. And Julie also wants to know how many people were there in the skills group.
So I had a minimum of so all the groups were 8 to 12. That was the where we would put them. Then obviously there's always like one or two people that dropped out, but the group that I have that went smaller, it always had consistently at least 6 people. But the other two groups, I run 3 groups, and from those three, it was like six, the average 6, 8, and 10 to those groups. So 10, it was a bit of a stretch when they were all in, to be fair. But we would do what I would do is in homework review, we would divide into 2 smaller groups, and my co leader and I would go into smaller groups with them to make it more efficient.
Okay. Martin is back with one more question. He asked about the medication. I think the question is about this. He writes DVT, but he probably means DBT. And the question is whether it had an impact on compliance. The way I understand the question is, did it have an impact on how they complied with medication plans?
Yeah. So we did assess that, like, so we have the scale specifically to assess that there was not enough. Like, I think we had 2 people that stood out because I looked at the results and I think there was 2 people there, essentially that were not compliant with their medication, and we could there was differences between them and the rest of people in terms of attendance. So that was all I was able to
Hmm.
pick up, but I think there was not enough within them to separate. And when I did linear mixed models analysis, in terms of medication compliance, I couldn't find differences with the different variables of the program. So that's what I can say. But it wasn't thought in advance. I would have liked to have that more clearly stated as an hypothesis to be completely fair. So I just transformed into dichotomic, like were he like compliant or not, and then did this affect his attendance or not. So that's how I tested it out, but I didn't find much. I think most of mine were just well behaved. So I was lucky, I think, with the group. It would have to be replicated in a bigger sample.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Oh yeah, there's a new question. Let me see. I'll just read it to you. Jeremy is writing, thank you very much. Extremely informative. Just to clarify, if the patients were not suicidal, self-harm, etc., stage 1 target behaviors, then one would have them in the BDBT?
BDBT?
Should I repeat it?
Yeah, it's just the end. I'm not sure what's referring to, BDBT.
The BDBT is probably meaning your group program. The
Be real. Sorry.
Be real. Yes.
Okay. So what? So the maybe just maybe clarifying the inclusion criteria would be important. So for the inclusion criteria, they had to have mood symptoms and high emotion dysregulation in the last 2 years, and not had tried or attempted suicide in the last 6 months. And we did do a risk assessment as well. So I did have a risk assessment scale, and they couldn't score very high in the risk scale, which it was like having a plan, having tried suicide in the last 6 months. So these were what contributed. They could have frequent thoughts about it. So this was not an exclusion criteria. If they had self-harm, we would explore how much and the severity of it. Because this was not addressed specifically, we could not include people who were having like high levels of self-harm. So the exclusion criteria would be like cutting and things that had a possibility of high escalation and high consequences leading to medical problems or death. So they couldn't have had medical support for it. I had people that scratched themselves or hit stuff. So that kind of self-harm would be allowed in, and it would be included in the diary card as a problem behavior. But if it was more very frequent and potentially dangerous, then that would be a reason for exclusion, but they would be followed by someone else. So again, I think we had 2 people that scored higher, and they had a very high risk, and they were followed by then the risk team that took them over. So they were not left without treatment.
Okay. Jeremy has one more question. He wants to know whether you involve parents also in the Be Real groups.
Not in this case, because it was just adults, so I don't know if it was clear. So we did have we divided between young adults and adults, so with all ages. So we did kind of did that to facilitate the group connection. So when we randomized by blocks, we made sure we had blocks of younger adults and then adults like 30 plus, 35 plus, I think, then up to 55. That was our age range. But yeah, no parents or family involved. But however, we did like encourage them to share the materials with their families and and share what they learned. And some of them did brought that in, but there was no sessions for that.
One more question I have myself is about individual consultations for people with bipolar disorder. Do you think we should keep anything in mind? I mean, any priorities or specific directions that we should not forget in those consultations?
In terms of individual treatment with people with bipolar? Yeah, I think it's definitely lose some time at the beginning, like in the pre-treatment phase, to understand that person group of vulnerabilities and cycles. So bipolar disorder has typical cycles. Most people will do. They will tell you they have like 2 big depressive episodes per year, and then a couple of minor hypomanic. Some will say I have at least 1 manic episode a year. So these kinds of things. And when does it actually happen? Does it happen in the summer and then the winter? Is it the other way around? What do they actually already know that they have seen. I would map this out. I had an interview that I developed as well with my PhD. And in that interview, we had mood variation across life. And I would register all the mood episodes they were able to characterize with time. And that really helped me because and some of them they didn't have an idea of the patterns until we put it down. And I was like, oh yeah, like the last 3 years, I did have two at least every year. So I would do that, have a look, see everything that they have already identified as early signs, triggers, and all that, and then what are the current problem behaviors, and include all of those in the diary cards. So if they drink too much and they use that, all of those would go in there. Get into fights, hit things, in the wall. Just make sure you go a bit beyond what the person would usually say because we're not just looking at the self-harm. So yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you. One person wants to know about some literature. They ask about a book by Sherry von Dijk from 2009, which is called the DBT Skills Workbook for Bipolar Disorder, using DBT to regain control of your emotions and your life. So the question is whether you made use of that book.
Yeah. So it is turned into the person. And it's quite simplified. What I didn't found when looking into them a lot of materials that I found that I didn't found it that helpful in terms of going in the meet and greet and use it in group as well, because then that one is to work. It's works worksheets for individuals to do themselves at home. So obviously you can use them with your clients, but there's some that suggest there at the beginning like the emotions, but it has very little information. That's what I found. So I initially looked into it, see what I could use from there, and took some ideas. But I found the enhanced DBT for bipolar much more detailed and more specific. But there are good examples there that I think can be useful. And they are more simplified in some of the skills, which can be helpful.
Okay. One more question that I have. I found a very nice way to phrase the differences in emotion regulation patterns when you talked about avoidance-oriented and approach-oriented patterns. What are the clinical implications? I mean, for example, in your group program or in individual consultations, I mean, can we use that in a practical sense?
Yeah, I think you can, because the reason why those profiles came out is because they were showing up in clinical work a lot. And so that you will see that people, even people that sometimes go high, some people are so afraid to being high that they will avoid anything that puts them in danger of. And when that's the typical response, is like when you ask them, what do you do when you notice you're getting irritable? It's like, oh, I won't talk with anyone, so they don't notice. Like, so I'll go home and try to shut myself out from the world. So I think it comes up in the conversation because they will use it for both. That's the interesting part. Even if they're going low or high, they will try and like avoid most things because they are
it
afraid.
might be too rigid, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, so that's why it is just important to look at those different types of strategies. So even the rumination, even when the person is ruminating, are they ruminating about how bad it is and how bad it's going to go, how bad they are? Or are they ruminating about, oh, this is going to be great, it's going to be amazing, and they just go on that because there's positive rumination is a thing in bipolar. And people might disregard that or think that's not a problem, but it is an emotion regulation strategy that it dysregulates. So they use it in order to get them up there and doing it, but then it can lose control. So that's why I think understanding those and how do they go, we can stop the spiral before it gets to any of the extremes.
Yes, very interesting example, the rumination one. Okay.
Yes.
Let me check again what the chat is doing. I can't see anything new at the moment, but I'll be refreshing it. Just a second. Well, it's still loading. Yes, I don't have anything new anymore. Let me see.
Might have exhausted everyone.
Yeah, I'm also through my own questions, I think. Yes, would you maybe want to add anything yourself?
Well, I think like I covered it all. I honestly I do feel like if people have specific questions, do please email me. And what I can say that I've like noticed that people find quite useful is really just understanding their systems, like the way things work better. So I do think DBT is quite helpful in the showing how each emotion behaves, and then connecting that with the different mood states. It's quite helpful, and having things visible. So, as you might imagine, because the levels of activity change a lot and energy in these people, it is very easy to lose track of information, of the information, plans, and all of that you've done in session. So, I would say remember to have visuals. I think that was something that people mentioned, and I noticed in individual practice is like putting them down, having plans, like this is the plan, this is what I'll do, like even like an arrow going high and then have a bunch of stuff, and then low and then have a bunch of stuff. So that's why I found it very interesting, and I would be happy to share because all my the patients and participants of the Be Real, they said they would allow me to share the joint work we did in terms of relaxation, minimization, maximization. And this was done with more than 30 different people. So all of them said the stuff that worked for them in each of those situations. And I think having lots of examples really helps because then people can test it out. Because they will say, sometimes you give two or three, and it's like, I've tried that, doesn't work. And then you yourself is like, I don't have any more in my head. So having a big list of what can work in those different situations and then have them pick them up and put up the ones that work for them, it's quite useful. So that's what I think would be the top tip.
Julieta, thank you so much. This has been very inspiring, and it really feels how you live with this and how you have done so much work, but you're going to do more, I'm sure. And thank you so much for sharing everything that you have accumulated. I can see that from the comments also that people are very happy and thankful. So thank you very much again to you. Thank you also for our audience. Thank you for everyone for being together with us. And I hope the webinar we had will be helpful in your research, but also in your clinical work. So
Thank you, everyone.
bye-bye, and please